in the long line of adopting earlier traditions and, dare I say, cultural intellectual property, to build something new out of it and give yourself a little greater legitimacy in your new work, a kind of reflective sheen from the earlier examples. We come to the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, which is the national epic of Ethiopia. Came out in roughly the 14th century, but this text had come out then, but had lived in various forms, oral tradition among them, for quite some time. Where it builds on Bible stories and recenters recenters the religion around their own civilization instead of Jerusalem. You get stories of the Queen of Sheba. Narrative derives primarily from portions of the Hebrew Bible called First Kings and Second Chronicles, telling a story of a 10th century BCE queen of the south, who travels to Jerusalem loaded with wealth, which she gives to the legendary King Solomon. The king and the queen speak. They spend some considerable time together. She is impressed with his wisdom and piety and converts from her own sun-worshipping faith to Judaism. He loads her up with gifts and she leaves. That's the story we have from the biblical sources. So that was just there. And somebody at some point looked at that and said, I can do something with that. What if I just developed that little story? So you get this, an epic of another son who was unaware, perhaps, of his heritage until he comes into power, and that then transfers the dignity of that heritage onto a new site for, political purposes, cultural purposes, but certainly that benefits the people in that new narrative. This is written in a language called Ge'ez, classical Ethiopian. The original elements of this story span a couple of different languages, a couple of different traditions, but they all come into being with the Solomonic dynasty, so-called Solomonic dynasty, which came to power in or around 1270 and lasted until 1974. So for those of you who might say, well, this is all just ancient history, depends how you view the 1970s. I will preface that. But here at 1974, there was still a government on earth that drew its legitimacy from this claim that they are the descendants of Solomon. That dynasty, political dynasty that lasted 700 years or so, maintained very deep connections with the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian Church. Members of the dynasty also always maintained that they were descendants of Solomon, and that gave them the authority to beat back challenges to them politically so that they could last for 700 years. The story is set up as a frame tale, which is a literary device where you set up a grand story where somebody or many people within that grand story tell their own individual stories. So it becomes a kind of game of telephone where, again, you're called on as readers to wonder, well, okay, who's really giving me the truth here? And often enough, the answer is nobody. Everybody is giving you their perspective, their spin, their story, and the frame tale device is just a further distancing of you from that. Instead of a narrator coming and telling you, this is how it is, we're told that, instead this narrator comes up to you and said, I heard about this guy who told me this is how it is. And immediately we're sort of withdrawn from that a little. We're put at a distance and we're not going to buy what they have to say as immediately. Because if somebody tells you, I got a great tip on how the Yankees are going to do this season, and let's get some money in on that, you're much more likely to go and do that if that guy doesn't start off by saying, well, my cousin tells me that the Yankees are going to do this season. I don't know your cousin. I don't trust him, so I'm not going to pony up my cash for this. That distancing effect is right there. And this takes advantage of that. And you have to be aware of that because, again, we're dealing with, in essence, a sequel to the Hebrew Bible. How seriously are you going to take it? Does the fact that it has a biblical connection lend it more credibility to you? Or do you think, well, why would somebody, why wouldn't this be around well before 1270? Why am I just hearing about this now? That seems shifty. That complicates your interpretation, that adjusts your reading. What we're talking about, however, with this is about something called the divine right of kings, which we have seen again and again in a lot of the literature of this class. The belief that the king of any civilization is the legitimate ruler by the word of God. God ordains that this person and his family line shall hold power over everybody else. And any question is hostile to God. You can't make an objection if you're told that, well, God says this guy should be in charge. Who am I to object? Who am I to say, how about somebody else? How about me? How about anybody? No. Divine right of kings. God chose that guy. And everybody connected to that guy is thus legitimate. Anybody who's not is illegitimate and cannot hold power. It is a remarkably persuasive argument throughout history. Just think of how many times we revere certain families, royal or not, and say, wow, what a great family. They should be in charge. Throughout the story, however, we get, again, a number of values being thrown off. There is the grand narrative of this queen goes and meets Solomon. a child is produced, and that child then goes to rule in Ethiopia with the queen, and brings the dignity and the majesty and the divine favor along with him, literally transposing God's favor from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. But if you read the little details, the little grace notes within that story, you can get a greater sense of what the text is trying to do. One of the minor characters in this, I think, is significant, identified as the merchant, and a respected one. And then you have to think, well, okay, this is Ethiopia. This is north-ish eastern African coastline in the very valuable real estate along trading routes between Asia and Europe. Ethiopia becomes a port that is a powerhouse for trade. So a merchant is a valued and significant member of that society. So it is the merchant who is singled out, the merchant who is celebrated. How a society characterizes its leading citizens is going to tell you an awful lot about that society. This is a society that values merchants, trade, the free exchange of ideas and goods. We're told at one point, the merchant was very smart, so he observed Solomon's wisdom, marveled at it, and was careful to pay attention to Solomon's responses, to his justice, his eloquence, and pleasant speech, to his conduct, his sitting down and standing up, his deeds, his affectionate ways, as well as to his administration, his banquets, and his laws. Solomon commanded in a friendly and mild manner those to whom he gave orders, and if they transgressed, he pardoned them, because he ruled his house with wisdom and in the fear of God. He gently rebuked the innocent and gently assigned the maidservants their tasks. He spoke in parables, his words sweeter than honeycomb. His entire manner was pleasant, and his entire being charming. Sounds like a great guy. But look at the values that are being expressed here. This is the value of diplomacy. This is the value of negotiation. He talks to the maidservants about their tasks. He attends to all the minor details of society. He is tolerant of their opinions and seeks to accommodate them. He commanded in a friendly and mild manner those to whom he gave orders, and if they transgressed, he pardoned them. So he's not ruling with an iron fist. He's ruling as a kind of negotiator-in-chief, bringing people together. But again, remember the character of a trading society, a merchant society, where you're not so stiff with the rules. The operating rule for the whole civilization is we all need to get along to get along. We're going to find common ground. We're going to find a productive way forward so that we can always get together, make a little money, and get along. This is not ideological. This is not my way or the highway. This is, okay, we have a nice society going here. We need to find a way to keep it going. And so you have an opinion, I have an opinion. We're going to come together with those opinions and find a way forward with them. This is how you get along in business, and it's how this text seems to be suggesting you should get along in life. The character of a businessman should be the character of a political leader. The ideas are essentially the same. They're about bringing people together to find a productive way forward. But you can also see an awful lot of concern with wealth itself. The idea of a society that is very big into business is going to be it's going to value money more than perhaps ethics. Remember, all of that go along to get along is for the object of making money, of keeping business going, of keeping the society, the civilization, the city, a place where people can come and do business. And so that leads to wealth. And you get conspicuous attention to objects of wealth. Suggests a valuing of wealth itself. It's not just that, oh, everybody gets rich because it's a great place to be. Maybe it's a great place to be because everybody gets rich, glorifying those who have money. People like an established royal family, perhaps. The physical objects of wealth come in for great veneration. There are remarkable stretches of description of Solomon's fabulous wealth. But is that more seduction? Is that more exoticism? Trying to paint that as, wow, what a great place. Or is it trying to say it as, wow, Solomon is a little too caught up in money. And the grace of God that shines upon his leadership would perhaps be better off further away, where people are more genuine, less wealthy. That notion also of Solomon going in and negotiating with all of the household maids, which seems like he is a great king and he's talking with the maid about how to do their job. We're told also when they were, one of the things Solomon is most famous for doing in the Bible is building a temple. We're told, meanwhile, Solomon worked on constructing God's temple. He would rise up and walk to the right and to the left, to the front and the back of the construction site, showing the workers how to use the measuring tools, the scales and the saws, telling the smiths how to use the hammer, chisel, and the mallet. Everything was carried out according to Solomon's command. Nobody transgressed it. Does this sound like a good boss? I don't know about anybody here, but if you've ever been on a construction site or near guys who work with tools, when you go up as the boss and start telling them how to use those tools, it doesn't go well. That is not an endearing quality. And it's probably not realistic that a king can go around and say, hey, you're swinging that hammer all wrong. A king doesn't have time for that. He has other things to do. So that makes me think, well, all right, there's a problem there. Maybe they're not really talking about tools. Maybe this is just an example, again, of how a king is supposed to be. Concerned with all levels of his government, attentive to them, not taking them for granted. Everything was carried out according to Solomon's command. Nobody transgressed it. He ran things well. He's a manager. He knows how to keep things going. But he is also in this putting himself at the very center of the activity. You're building a temple, that's your job? Okay, but I am going to direct everything. Okay, now you have the nail in place. Lift that hammer up. Now put it down on the nail. Now lift the hammer back up, put it back down on the nail. Without that instruction, the nail doesn't go in. So Solomon is setting himself up as the linchpin for the entire society, which again sounds a little bit like him to Aten, responsible for the sun rising and the people going out in fishing boats and all the traffic during the day. This is absolute authority. This is absolute power. This is a kind of centralized authority raised to a level of tyranny. Nobody can do anything without Solomon's say-so. This is being pitched as the model of government. So think back again to the 700 plus years that ended in 1974. How liberal do you think those governments were? How much do you think they granted freedom to the people underneath them? How controlling and centralized do you think they kept their power? We're told at another point, truly everyone should worship God who has fashioned everything, heaven and earth, the sea and the dry land, the sun and the moon, the stars and the other shining celestial bodies, the trees and the stones, the mammals and the birds, the land predators and the crocodiles, the fish and the whales, the hippopotamuses and the turtles, lightning and thunderstorms, clouds and thunder, and good as well as bad people. Him alone should we worship, with fear and trembling, with joy and happiness, for he is Lord over everything, the creator of angels and human beings. He puts to death and he can bring to life. He punishes and he forgives. He raises the poor man from the dust and lifts the wretched man from the mud. He afflicts and he delights and he raises up and casts down. Nobody can reproach him because he is Lord over everything. Nobody can say to him, "What have you done?" He deserves praise and thanksgiving from the angels and from humanity. Now, I am not just out of breath because I am woefully out of shape and need to go to the gym. I am out of breath because that's a lot. There are long sentences there. It's a kind of inundation about everything that he does, everything that he is responsible for, all the reasons that he is great. God, right? Not a human being who claims to be ruling in God's stead, right? That's clear. We're not talking about a government inherited from God, inherited from God's chosen monarch of Solomon and that entire line down to 1974. Right? We're talking about God, not the person. Again, him to Aten. The Lord over everything jumps out at me, but nothing so much as nobody can reproach him because he is Lord over everything. Nobody can reproach him? Now, if that's what you believe, and that's what you have put into a kind of scriptural form, your founding national epic here, the legend of your civilization's creation, nobody can reproach God, or perhaps by extension, God's representative. How do you criticize the king? How do you say, you know, king, things could maybe be a little better around here. Maybe people could have a little bit more freedom. Maybe we could pay fewer taxes to you. Maybe we could just have things a little different. But no. Nobody has a right to reproach. Nobody can raise an objection at all. It's written. So it has to be true. Solomon and the Queen of Sheba have a semi-consensual sexual intercourse, and soon thereafter Solomon has a dream that pretty clearly symbolizes a shift in divine grace from Jerusalem down to Ethiopia. After King Solomon had fallen asleep, a brilliant sun appeared to him, descending from the skies and shining brightly over Israel. Later, however, after remaining there a long time, it suddenly withdrew and soared away until it came to the land of Ethiopia. Then it shone brightly there, and will for eternity, because it loved to dwell there. Pretty obvious symbolism. I'm going to go out on a limb with that one. It's hard to miss that. If you're living in Ethiopia, and especially if you're part of this family that just happens to tie your family line to Solomon, you know, that's a good thing. The sun shifts to reflect that Ethiopia is now God's favorite land. And you get this succession of other little hints at how rulers should rule and what constitutes legitimate rule over time. The Queen of Sheba herself, in sending her son to Solomon, the queen instructs Tamreen the merchant to bring her son back to Ethiopia to rule after connecting with Solomon on the logic that from now on a man from your lineage shall rule Ethiopia. No woman shall ever rule in the stead of your lineage and descendants, not for eternity. It's really nice for the Queen of Sheba to come out and say, oh yeah, women can't be doing this. That's crazy talk. Let it be understood that from now on, the only legitimate rulers can be men. It's rare that you get something that explicit making that claim. On meeting with his son, Solomon reacts, "You said to me, he looks like you. Yet this is not my build, but rather the build of my father, David, in his youth. He looks much better than I do." So here, the missing, long-lost son comes back, meets his father, and he's not only his father's son, but is a callback to the further progenitor of David. So it's almost as if is more regal than Solomon himself, more legitimate a ruler than Solomon himself. All of these little asides about how to rule, all of these little asides about who should rule, what makes a good ruler, all these underscore the basic political purpose of the story. But that shouldn't overshadow the artistic merit of the story either. There is a basic human instinct being demonstrated in this, and that is that everybody, and perhaps universally among human beings, everybody wants to feel a part of divine grace. Everybody wants that sense of God's blessing. And so here we have an example of a people, a civilization, who want to share in the specialness of being the chosen people. The problem with being a chosen people is that it is elitist. It doesn't allow others in on that. But if you can find a way through art, through literature, through culture to crack into that and get that taste of divinity, get that taste of God's favor, God's grace, that creates beauty. That creates that human desire for the eternal, for the ideal, for the divine. And that shouldn't be overshadowed just by all the politics. The politics can be a simple and understandable material way of entering into an appreciation of a work of art. But the idea that that's the only way to appreciate art is laughable. Ultimately, you start with whatever gives you an access to meaning. And if it's the political, fine. If it is the personal, the religious, the sexual, the human, the funny, the sad, the tragic, whatever gives you access to that work so that you can say, all right, I think I know what this is about, then you go with that. But then you don't limit it to that. You start there and you move beyond. You start there and you start asking questions. Well, what if? What if there was this other meaning? What if this didn't just apply to this group, but also applied to that group? What if there were other possibilities of meaning? Those aren't wrong meanings. Those aren't mistaken meanings. Those are just alternative meanings. And the good thing about culture generally, art, literature, what have you, is that there never is right and wrong. You can never be right or wrong. There are interpretations. And maybe yours is just a little different than somebody else's, even somebody way better educated than you are. But that's how meaning tends to proliferate. And that's how great art thrives through time.